Heroes of the Jewish American Community in May. If you know someone who is making a difference and making our community a better place to live, nominate your local hero by going to kcet.org/heroes and submit a nomination form. The stories of selected leaders will air on KCET as part of our Jewish American Heritage Month celebration. The deadline for nominations is Monday, March 7th.
KCET thanks the Patricia Wilson Trust, whose visionary circle contribution makes KCET programming possible. KCET thanks Judith Krantz, whose visionary circle contributions make KCET programming possible.
It's not the TV in your life that counts. It's the life in your TV. KCET. Rethink TV.
This is the nature of things.
Toronto's scorching summer continued today. The temperature and the humidex high again and again. Public health issued an alert.
We've broken another record in the GTA
Noel
today.
is now headed straight toward the Maritimes. Landfall
Florida shore.
As global warming triggers more extreme weather, flooding, droughts, heat waves, and smog, the health implications for city dwellers will be profound. Health experts predict a steep rise in heat-related problems, from strokes to respiratory illness, air and waterborne diseases, and physical injury. Will Canadian cities be able to cope? At first glance, a city like Toronto would appear to have little to fear from global warming. Far from angry seas and blessed with the moderating effects of Lake Ontario, Canada's largest city might even welcome warmer winters and a longer growing season. But as any resident will tell you, the fallout from global warming is already taking its toll on human health. Blanketed in thick smog, the Greater Toronto Area suffers some of the worst air quality in the country. With a ballooning population, insatiable energy needs, and crumbling infrastructure, Toronto is a patient in distress. According to the region's chief medical officer, global warming could put Toronto on life support.
In Toronto right now, with the climate that we've got, air pollution is responsible for about 1,700 extra deaths every year, premature deaths that need not happen, and about 6,000 people go to hospital every year as a result of air pollution. We know that as the climate gets warmer, the chemistry in our air that produces those air pollutants that are harming our health is going to increase, and we expect to see more deaths and more hospitalizations as a result of those warmer temperatures.
Although cars and trucks are major contributors to global warming and medical illness, cities like Toronto have become critically dependent on them to move people as well as basic goods and services.
What we're seeing right here, the Gardiner Expressway, is the result of decades of bad urban form, that low-density sprawl where the only way you can get to work is to hop in your car and get onto an expressway. It's also generating really bad air quality right here, and it's contributing to the contamination of the water, so we can't even swim in the beach. You go to all the trouble to get over this bridge, listen to the deafening noise of Mississauga and Etobicoke coming downtown. You get to the water, you got this little 20-foot strip of sand, that's all there is, and then the water's too polluted to swim in. This is exactly what is wrong with everything we did in terms of development from about 1955 to present. I don't know if we're ever going to be able to undo this mistake, but if we do, it'll be a sign that we've achieved a sustainable city.
Ongoing field studies conducted by Environment Canada and the University of Toronto indicate that when ground-level ozone gas combines with pollution already in the air, the resulting smog can become deadly, triggering a cascade of health problems.
We're just really beginning to untangle the link between environment and health, and how it may help contribute to the development of respiratory problems like asthma or contribute to heart disease. And evidence is mounting that there is a link between these different types of pollutants, ozone and traffic pollution.
These findings are being replicated in controlled inhalation studies conducted at the University of Toronto. Here, subjects breathe in pollutants over a 2-hour period. Comparing lung function, ECG, and blood work readings taken before and after testing, researchers are making some disturbing findings.
We recently had a publication where we showed when people inhaled the particles, the combined exposure, the particles and ozone, what we saw was a decrease in diameter of the brachial artery in the upper arm when we compared the measurement before the exposure to after the exposure. And what we've also showed is during the inhalation, during the 2 hours that they were inside, we saw an increase of the diastolic blood pressure during the inhalation challenge, and it was a progressive increase during the inhalation. So both of these effects tie into the population studies that have shown when the air pollution is higher outside, there's more people are admitted to the hospital for both respiratory and cardiovascular health effects.
We're already finding more and more illness related to air pollution. We're finding, for example, that diabetes can be related to air pollution. We're finding that hypertension can be related to air pollution. Cardiovascular effects, such as stroke, are related to air pollution. We had no idea of these connections, say, 20 years ago. So what we're finding then is that you can trace back health-related problems from air pollution to a broader spectrum of the population.
As we look more closely, we have to begin to say, is that just the tip of the iceberg? Is there more to it in terms of other pollutants that are related to our use of pesticides and to our changing uses of fuels that we might select to try to improve our carbon emissions? For example, switching to ethanol or switching over to more use of diesel vehicles will create a different mix of pollutants. And we don't quite have the detailed understanding of the air pollution health mix to predict whether or not that's going to be beneficial to public health or actually create more problems.
Concern about the interaction of atmospheric pollutants grows as the city's vast heat-absorbing membrane of concrete and asphalt amplifies temperature readings, making them 5 to 6 degrees hotter than surrounding areas. These higher temperatures accelerate the release of low-level ozone into the already polluted air. As people increasingly rely on their air conditioners to stay cool, more fossil fuels are burned, creating even more global warming. Cities like Toronto now find themselves caught in this vicious cycle.
The heat alert issued by Toronto's medical officer of health yesterday was upgraded today to an extreme heat alert, and it's still on.
How are you feeling now, Pat? Good, about 14.
Here at the Toronto Rehabilitation Institute, doctors are studying how heat affects the human body. Heart rate and other measurements are taken before and directly after exercise of varying intensity.
We're starting to plateau.
All right, okay, so we're hitting the wall here. Terrific.
As summer temperatures continue to rise, doctors fear a much larger percentage of the population could begin experiencing debilitating heat stress.
Well done, yeah. Just do that cool down breathing. At a point, our bodies will overheat, get over 40 degrees Celsius, and then we lose our ability to regulate any further. We kind of maintain at that plateau. We lose the ability to sweat, and then our body temperatures will elevate even more. The body becomes very disordered at this level. Because we get dehydrated, we may get dizzy and pass out. These are all very, very dangerous signs as we enter these phases of heat stress to heat stroke. We've seen in heat waves in different places in the United States and Europe in recent years where hundreds, if not thousands of people have died because of these excessive heat waves.
The City of Toronto now issues regular heat alerts as the difficult job of protecting human health falls to local social service and volunteer agencies.
With the increase of the heat alerts, we work very closely with the City of Toronto in opening up cooling centres. And during extreme heat alerts, we also do water distribution to the vulnerable, going into parks, for example, and making sure homeless individuals have availability of fresh drinking water to keep themselves hydrated.
The larger a city like Toronto grows, the hotter it becomes. And with traffic gridlock already paralyzing the major arteries of the GTA, the combination of heat and pollution is producing a chemical soup. The problem, according to health experts, is one of scale.
One person running an SUV for a few hours, negligible impact on any environment or any health consequence. Hundreds of millions of SUVs running for hundreds of millions of hours, and bang, it's about scale. Small events cumulatively have massive imprints on the environment, and when the environment gets perturbed, health consequences can follow.
We expect to have more extreme weather. We expect to have hotter weather. We expect that the summers will be longer, and we expect those summers then to be more uncomfortable.
The majority of people don't like to think about the bad stuff, whether it be a tornado, a severe windstorm, or prolonged heat or drought. People need to realize that these things can happen in Canada, and we need to be prepared.
As warm sea breezes usher in summer, the city of Halifax blossoms into an ocean paradise. Suffering few of the congestion problems associated with other large Canadian cities, Halifax is a popular place to live, work, and play. Yet the reality is that global warming has affected Halifax more than any other city in Canada. In 2003, a devastating hurricane, Juan, ripped into the city, uprooting trees, downing infrastructure, and flooding streets and buildings.
The Hurricane Center saying that the eye of the storm will be on us in about 5 minutes' time.
HRF Mayor Peter Kelly has declared a state of local emergency effective immediately.
Operations at the ferry terminal were in chaos.
The whole front of the building, all the banks of windows were knocked out with the surge. And even along the shoreline here, our ferry terminal here, a lot of this rock was several feet higher. The storm surge, the hurricane, tore that rock out. Where it ended up, some of it was brought up over the plantings. It was brought up against the building. Some of it was probably pulled back into the harbor. And but you can just imagine that was probably another 4 or 5 feet higher. Large rocks that probably weigh several hundred pounds each. Just the impact of that storm hitting.
As the storm grew more violent, municipal workers sometimes risked their lives to protect their city's infrastructure. Ferry operators Derek Smith and Tim Thorne were among them.
There was one boat was beating itself to pieces, and the other one had broken 4 lines and 4 wires and 2 lines, and was just hanging on, beating against the side of the dock. It was dark, it was blowing 100 miles an hour, it was raining as hard as it could rain, and you're trying to walk in water that's up to your knees, walking on rocks, and you don't know where they are.
We climbed on the boat, got the engines going, put the power to the boat, and basically kept the boat powered up for an hour and a half, 2 hours until the storm passed. We put the thrust ahead and put the blades in a 90-degree pitch. We can hold the boat in bodily to the dock, and we just held on and rode it out. It keeps it, once you keep the pressure on it.
Elsewhere, century-old trees were sucked out of the ground and hurled like matchsticks, blocking streets and cutting off power for weeks. Then, only months later, Halifax was hammered again, this time by White Juan, a powerful blizzard that dumped over 100 centimeters of heavy drifting snow. In both instances, healthcare services ground to a halt.
It's almost surreal. We came in the morning, and when there's really no power, there is no power in the streets, and the streets are black. You cannot see anything. And in fact, we did not see that one of our hospitals, the roof had blown completely off. So we had no idea what we were dealing with. We did have emergency power for our patients. However, staff, many couldn't get in. We didn't know. We thought it looked okay, but as the morning unfolded and we got rain later on that morning as well, another little tropical storm, the impact was even larger, and we looked up in the operating rooms and could see stars. So there was no roof.
In a coastal city like Halifax, public safety depends on timely and accurate weather forecasts. But predicting the weather is no easy task.
One of the big challenges we face here is the speed that the storms are moving. They're typically accelerating very quickly, so the amount of warning time to give people is reduced significantly because of that. And another reason for their difficult prediction is they change from being purely hurricanes to mid-latitude low-pressure systems. So the structure of these storms is constantly changing and evolving while they're affecting Canadian territory. So that's very difficult to try to time when those changes are going to occur.
Based on the experience of Juan, public safety is likely to be Halifax's biggest healthcare challenge with global warming. The difficult task of managing disasters will again fall to agencies like the Red Cross.
The Red Cross, through the Department of Community Services, has access to a national stockpile, and this stockpile can be accessed in approximately 5 hours. So we would have access to 5,000 to 10,000 beds, mobile kitchens, and other feeding equipment should the need arise. The Red Cross has a formula of 72 hours that we like to stress, and that is the importance of people in their homes being prepared to look after themselves for 72 hours until further help can arrive. One of the lessons from Hurricane Juan was the fact that we have to be prepared to help people for a length of time that sometimes exceeds 72 hours. The power was off in the Halifax and surrounding area and in many homes for almost 14 days. So with the assistance of other nonprofit organizations, bringing together food and water to some of the rural areas who had no water was certainly an issue. So I think one of the things is that these disasters do not just usually encompass a couple of days. That was a big learning experience for us.
But despite the best efforts of healthcare and emergency workers, critics argue conventional planning strategies simply can't cope with global warming.
One of the issues that has become more and more apparent is the capacity of the health services to respond. Where you're faced with a series of events, flooding, a drought, an increase in vector-borne diseases, an extreme event like a hurricane or a storm, and they're happening in close succession to each other. This is overburdening the health system. Where it has happened, clearly they have not been able to respond. And unfortunately, there is no plan in place to try and move the health system to that type of preparedness. We had situations where Hurricane Juan brought down some of these beautiful trees we have in Halifax, brought down power lines, brought down communication systems, such that doctors could not get to and from hospitals. Patients could not get to and from hospitals. And this happened not just for a few hours, but it happened for days. So your health system virtually brought to a standstill. We had communities were totally isolated and cut off here. This is a major health issue, it's a safety issue, and one of the problems is that we are having a difficult time trying to get the emergency response organizations, the health response organizations, to see that climate change is a different kind of problem to the one-off events that they've had to deal with in the past.
With coastal areas becoming increasingly vulnerable to extreme weather, human safety is at greater risk than ever before.
We're just seeing much more major coastal inundation taking place. So this isn't the only area in Nova Scotia that's being impacted. from the air, it shows a very good example of just what's taking place. So you can appreciate from here with the city and a lot of the suburban and urban areas literally right on the water, that when one of these major hurricanes or even the tail end of a major tropical storm hits, we're seeing the full blast of it. We're seeing the winds, we're seeing the coastal surges, and the rainfall. And so it's almost like a triple or quadruple whammy that we are seeing with this.
The City of Halifax is currently working with other levels of government, the business community, and academia to develop a comprehensive climate mitigation and adaptation strategy for the city. Armed with better information on everything from industrial emissions to coastal erosion to alternative energy, the city hopes to better protect residents from the health threats posed by global warming. The experience of Juan was a wake-up call for Halifax that galvanized the city into action. But as the experience with Juan fades, will public concern about global warming fade with it?
And I think part of the problem is nobody's really come to terms with the fact that the impacts from climate change are likely to have very significant effects on society, on our human health, on the environment, and the economy. And I think when we get that kind of realization into the public forum, and people realize that we're talking about major costs in social, environmental, economic, and development terms, then we'll likely start seeing more attention on the adaptation side, and hopefully more focus then on what do we need to do to make ourselves less vulnerable and more prepared to deal with these issues.
This is Vancouver, where I was born and spent most of my life. My family and I are ocean people. We love this area. But with global warming and sea level rise, much of the low-lying parts of this coastline could end up underwater.
Much of the Greater Vancouver area is built at or below sea level and has long been subjected to coastal erosion, severe storms, and flooding. But global warming is making this precarious situation worse.
This is what remains of large sections of one of Vancouver's most famous attractions, Stanley Park. This natural rainforest has withstood gale force winds for hundreds of years, but was no match for the violence of last winter's severe storms. Imagine the destruction that rising sea levels, combined with extreme weather, would have on the Greater Vancouver area.
According to a recent UN report, future sea levels could rise as much as 60 centimeters from global warming in future decades. This would flood large areas of Greater Vancouver, including its international airport built adjoining the Pacific.
A series of changing weather conditions has converged to produce the area's so-called perfect storm. First, BC's south coast now experiences wild swings in weather, from very heavy snow dumps to extremely warm weather almost overnight. Late winter and early spring precipitation now falls as heavy rain instead of additional snow, causing more spring runoffs as snow melts faster. And warmer winter weather increases the likelihood that floodwaters will roar down the Fraser River from the mountains.
The perfect storm will likely occur here, where the Fraser River meets the Pacific. Protected by miles of dikes, this region could become Vancouver's litmus test for climate change.
To give you a sense of the kind of infrastructure we have about 620 kilometers of a drainage system. We have 38 pump stations around the island, and we have some internal to the island to help move the water to the edge of the island. And our pump stations vary in size depending on the type of land use.
You know, the delta of any great river thing that's constantly moving. I mean, that's the nature of a delta. And yet what we're seeing is these dike systems are an attempt to freeze the delta, right? To keep it from moving so that we can exploit that area.
One of the things we realized years ago is that we have to continue to move ahead and continue to look ahead and not look back to past for all of the answers. We need to continue to move ahead.
This is an animation that we did of one part of the dike system showing the sea level rising under normal current conditions to what we would call a normal high tide situation. Plenty of dike left here for protection. But if we move into time, we go to 2050 under those same storm surge conditions, you'll see by the end of the century, it's actually at the top of the dike. We've lost the protection that the engineers want to have. And so the only way to prevent that was to raise the dike. In the past, those kinds of efforts to improve or strengthen dikes have been not popular. It impacts farming, it impacts some of the ecosystems, the drainage system, so it's not necessarily easy or simple to just sort of adapt by raising the dike.
Despite the potential for disaster, an incredible $30 billion worth of new development has been approved, including expansion of the airport adjoining the Richmond Dikes. Between 2004 and 2005, housing starts in the region increased 40%, and the total value of new building construction in 2005 alone hit $500 million.
Here in Richmond, some insurance companies won't insure against flood. They reason that if people build their homes on a floodplain, then at some point their houses will be flooded. Why then do people keep building here? You know, we've learned from Mississippi, the Mississippi River, that a delta is kind of like a living entity that's constantly shifting. And you wonder, should we be building cities in an area like this with the risks that go with the changes?
Well, I think in the West Coast and certainly in Richmond, we accept the risk. Anywhere in Canada or anywhere in the world, there's a risk. It might be tornadoes in Ontario or Winnipeg, or ice storms in Ontario, or windstorms in Nova Scotia and so on. So everywhere there's a risk. And we accept those risks and manage to it. We like this area because of the climate. It's a gateway to Asia. We have an airport, we have good resources, lumber, fishing, mining, and so on. We have a very high-tech industry, so people come for the climate and the jobs. So those are the draw factors. I know right now the GVRD region is about 2 million people. The projections to 2031 are that it'll go to about 3 million.
With a new $2 billion rapid transit line connecting the airport to Vancouver, and as one of the host sites for the 2010 Winter Olympics, Richmond is depending on its dikes to safeguard the public. I talked to critics who, despite these and other efforts, remain skeptical.
You know, my experience is that the Richmond Council here is very, very progressive in that they're taking these threats very seriously.
Yeah, and I know that we've had conversations about this, and that they are interested in retaining the value of Richmond as an urban center. And so will they be investing? I suspect they will. The combination of rising sea level and then failure of the dikes in the event of an earthquake is the scenario I see as the time where they will rethink whether Richmond should be where it is. They've not been willing to take that next step that says, we developed here, it was a mistake. We'll go and develop somewhere that's safer.
You know, I've always made the point that foresight, our ability to look ahead, was the great strategy for our species' survival, to avoid dangers, exploit opportunities. And yet when you get into urban settings like this, and you try to make the argument, look, climate change is coming, we better do this, then you find there are all kinds of barriers that are really perceptual barriers rather than anything scientific or factual.
Wish I could share your optimism in our ability to have foresight. My fear is that we learn lessons the hard way. and that even though a few people will have the foresight to warn people about the dangers ahead, what we will actually do is say, oh, you know, for example, the oven is hot, don't put your hand on it. Really? Is it hot? Let me touch, right? And I think until we touch and burn ourselves, we don't tend to learn those lessons. And it's part of the way the human system works.
Whatever scenario unfolds, frontline health workers will have to ensure adequate medical care can be provided and maintained.
So let's suppose that you do get an extreme storm, or that there's a heavy flood from high melting in the mountains. The dikes are breached. Then what kind of a challenge does that confront you with?
Well, that's a major challenge for not just for healthcare, but for the community in a more general sense. For our clients and our residents, we would be looking at trying to find alternate arrangements where they could be relocated to another facility, but that we are able to maintain the appropriate level of care, and that includes not just moving them to the right facility, but also moving all their logistical requirements. So, I mean, residents or patients that are on dialysis or have special equipment and requirements, those needs need to be met. And we also need to think about making sure that we're redeploying our staff in a way that we can maintain that level of care and we aren't putting too much of a burden on the receiving facilities that are accepting our at-risk clients and patients.
And what about long term, after the flood recedes? Are there health issues that come out of what you're left with afterwards?
Yeah, recovery issues are always a big deal, and for healthcare as well. It's just like any other facility or business where the floodwaters go away. You can't just move back into the facility again. I mean, you have to rip out walls and rip out floors and get rid of any mold and, you know, make sure that everything is built to code again, and that takes some time.
As in Halifax, the potential for multiple events in Greater Vancouver is real. Much of the region lies over a seismic fault. An earthquake, combined with a large storm surge caused by global warming, could completely overwhelm emergency services. But is anyone listening?
How well do you think this region is preparing for a warmer, different world?
They're not at all. I mean, I think we're still at the place where a large number of people don't fully believe it. We're still at a place where the politicians won't put money behind it. So they talk the right way, but they then don't do the money. The Kyoto was an example. We had a chance. We had some targets. We had some things that we could have done, and everybody sort of said, hey, the economy's booming. Why don't we just enjoy it? And that's really when you should be doing these things, when the economy's booming, when you can afford to spend some additional money on some of the things that we need to do. But instead we sort of say, well, we'll do that later. You and I have gotten old together, and we know that this is not our generation's planet anymore. We have used our footprint on this planet. This is the younger generations, and we've got to start doing something now.
Increasingly, cities across Canada are devising local strategies to protect public health from the impacts of global warming. New initiatives to educate about and promote sustainability are also being developed.
Education plays a key role when it comes to changing public perceptions and the willingness of the public to accept major policy changes. Education can give individuals and families tools to make changes at their own level, but it helps also to build support for public policies that might have downsides, that might be unpopular in other areas. So that education can shift the public's level of support for what needs to be done in order to confront the health impacts of climate change in cities.
One of the big challenges facing many Canadian cities is how to cut heat and smog. In Toronto, city planners hope the answer lies in making existing buildings more energy efficient and their surrounding environments greener and more pedestrian-friendly.
This is a hostile and brutal environment, and those towers are among the worst energy pigs anywhere in the city of Toronto. They are badly heated, badly air conditioned, and as the building form starts to decay, those problems get worse and worse. Now, there's a marvelous opportunity here. what's happening in some European cities is they're wrapping the outsides of them to insulate them better for ecological reasons, but they're also trying to revive some of these spaces at ground level, these parking lots and the dead green lawns that you know, have no gathering point, no place for people to learn their neighbors' names. If we can do this, if we can build market gardens here or maybe some at-grade stores where people can gather, a cafe, sort of spruce the buildings up and make them more energy efficient, we can actually transform this hidden Toronto into a real gem.
Another way to reduce heat and smog is with trees and plants that cool and filter the air. At first glance, this garden looks unremarkable, but it's growing on top of a downtown Toronto office building, itself surrounded by acres of hot asphalt.
We find that with the evaporation and transpiration through plants that takes place on a green roof, we're able to reduce the air conditioning costs for building owners. We're also able to absorb rainwater that then gets transferred to the atmosphere rather than directly to the storm sewers of cities. For a city the size of Toronto, the magnitude of the benefits is truly staggering, I think. Tens of millions of dollars in cost avoidance for infrastructure replacement, for the stormwater management systems, the reduced number of hospitalizations, the days that the beaches are open because the water that is running off the urban environment is reduced, and therefore the contaminants delivered to the beach is reduced. This is seen as a very positive benefit of this.
In Halifax, one of the biggest threats to public health is water contamination after a storm surge. With global warming in mind, city officials recently constructed a vast new storm sewer complex in the downtown that quadruples treatment capacity.
The worst case scenario, if there is a power outage in the plant, within less than 1 minute and probably less than that, a genset is going to be started. And the pumps will be started again based on the genset, and the flow is going to be treated and pumped so that there is no risk to get the plant flooded, even if it's the worst case scenario.
An added benefit of the plant is that it helps address a shameful environmental legacy, dumping the city's raw sewage directly into Halifax Harbor.
The residents and in the community, they will be able to swim, boating, and that's what they want to do with the harbor. And with this project, we're able to achieve that goal.
In each city that we visited, Canadians are becoming increasingly aware of the damaging health effects of global warming. But concerns about economic health still drive most decision-making. Individual Canadians continue to consume the equivalent resources of an entire third-world village. While more of us are making efforts to conserve, are we also prepared to make more fundamental changes?
Our economies are based on growth. Year over year, growth. In fact, we report growth quarterly. We look for growth in our GNP, and if we don't get growth, we're tremendously concerned. For quite a number of years, environmental economists have been questioning that whole notion of growth. How can we have a comfortable society while maintaining a stable and sustainable community? That's the big question. Certainly, commentators believe that both are achievable, but we have to question the notion of growth, what that means in terms of resource consumption. In terms of global warming, does growth mean increasing consumption of pharmaceuticals to offset the adverse health effects arising from discomfort and illness related to air pollution and heat? Is that the type of growth we want?
In cities, we expect science to solve our health problems, but global warming forces us to rethink this paradigm. In a society fixated on economic growth and global competition, what price tag are we placing on human health? And as we retreat into air-conditioned cars and homes to escape climate change, are we doing so at the expense of others? It's the poor and homeless who are already facing the full brunt of global warming. Living in substandard conditions or directly on the street, exposed to high levels of smog and heat, they suffer from numerous health problems.
These are people who are very susceptible to the effects of extremes of temperature. And that's because of, first of all, their chronic health conditions. I mean, their chronic lung conditions especially. Anytime the temperature rises, lung conditions tend to get worse. The stress on the body tends to get worse. Heart conditions tend to get worse. You combine that with substance use on the one hand, especially alcohol use, and you find that people tend to be more dehydrated than other people, which just kind of worsens the health effects of the heat. Combine that with other mental health issues that might prevent them from knowing they should go inside or knowing how to take care of themselves. And it really comes together to create a pretty huge problem for them in terms of their health.
Do we learn, as pessimists believe, only after bad things happen to us? Or collectively, can we break away from old patterns of consumption and growth?
We know that when we fought World War II, we got together as a country and in our communities, we amassed our resources. We as Canadians set our mind to defeating a villain. We did that very well. The villain's changed now. The villain, in fact, is partly us. It's our consumer habits, it's our expectations, it's how we live our lives. What history tells us is that we have the ability to make those changes, but we have to get really serious about it. We have to get serious about it in the same way that we got serious about fighting a war when we mobilized our resources, when we put our efforts into it. And I believe we can do that.
The temperature and the humidex spiked again, and again public health issued an alert. It felt like close to a muggy 40 degrees outside. That prompted an extreme heat alert from the city for the 18th time this summer. The alert means the city's cooling centers are open and health officials recommend staying indoors.
Remember 2003 when 15,000 Parisians died of heat? That was just the most obvious health risk in a warming world. As ecosystems come apart, because some species will thrive, others die out, and new ones move in, we can't predict what will ultimately result. But we can be sure that as ecosystems are stressed, new diseases like West Nile and malaria will appear. And there'll be huge impacts on agriculture, forestry, fisheries, water, and urban living. One of humanity's great advantages over other species is the ability to look ahead and see potential dangers and possible opportunities, so we can take steps to avoid the hazards and exploit the benefits. Foresight was the evolutionary gift that took us from being just another ape on the grasslands of Africa to our dominant position on the entire planet. Well, we've heard the pronouncement of scientists. We are affecting the climate, but there are lots of opportunities to avoid the risks if we act now. But the attitude of our leaders in business and government seems to be, it's not my problem. I won't be around when climate change kicks in.
For more information on the nature of things and geologic journey, visit our websites.
Ronald Reagan, An American Journey, is a film in Reagan's own words taken from the U.S. President's debates. Tonight at 9 on KCET. Using Reagan's own words from speeches, debates, and discussions, Ronald Reagan, An American Journey provides an in-depth look into the Reagan era. As the 40th president, he led our country for 8 years. However, his persona and leadership will remain with us forever. Don't miss Ronald Reagan, An American Journey, next, only on KCET. Get a view of the world from the world's point of view. KCET offers you a comprehensive recap of the day's events, from London with BBC World News at 5, and from Tokyo with NHK's Newsline at 5:30 every weeknight.